It's time for the first ever Straight Point eSESSIONS presented by the eTourism Summit. Succinct and straight to the point, these sessions are built upon three pillars: being useful, tangible, and free. Stay tuned all day long for presentations from leaders in the tourism industry. To get the session started, here is the president of Connect Travel, Will Seckham.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the eTourism Summit's straight to the point eSessions. We're thrilled to have you, really excited to be able to bring the eTourism Summit community together again on 2/22/22. It's a really crazy time in the travel industry, and I know I'm so impressed with the incredible work that tourism marketers have done over the craziness of the last couple of years. And, we find ourselves in such a weird place today, kind of one step forward, two steps back. We get the opening of international borders, and Australia opens yesterday, but we have emergency orders in Canada, and the craziness in the Middle East. So there's never ever been a time, I think, it's more important for us all to work together, to learn from each other, to share ideas and thoughts and concepts about how we can all continue to grow as tourism marketers. And that's what this straight to the point afternoon is for. And we're really, again, thrilled to be able to bring the industry and the community together today, but in advance of coming together live and in person in June in Orlando for the eTourism Summit, June 6th through 8th. Really thrilled with the partnerships that we have and all of the partners that are stepping up that are going to make that event a really amazing 3 days. And we're co-located with U.S. Travel Association at IPW. So really, in June, the entirety of the U.S. travel industry will be together in the same place. And we'll have the opportunity to, once again, connect, learn, and grow together as tourism marketers. So again, really excited about that. And I just wanted to kind of pique your interest and run a quick video of what it was like last year at eTourism Summit in Las Vegas. A great experience in Las Vegas to get everybody back together again and live and in person, and the same will be the case come June in Orlando. Can't wait to bring the industry back together. One of the things that I'm so excited about, and I want to thank all of you in the travel industry for really stepping up and supporting, is the travel vertical. And I want to do a shout out to Lori Jo Miller-Farr, the editor of the travel vertical. It's been absolutely amazing time over the course of the last 2 years, and what she's done to grow the audience and the subscription base of the travel vertical is truly a testament to every single week bringing the greatest work done by DMOs, done by tourism marketers around the country, and clearly in the last couple of years, just identifying people on the move and new job openings and opportunities for the industry. So if you haven't already, I would certainly encourage you to subscribe to the travel vertical. And also subscribe to the Travel Vertical podcast. It's a new initiative that we started last year, really highlighting kind of some of the key things that are happening in the industry and really pointing out the people on the move. There's been a tremendous amount of movement in the industry this last couple of years, and there's no doubt that is going to continue. So stay connected and in touch with your colleagues, and we're going to roll a quick video on the Travel Vertical.
TheTravelVertical.com features weekly stories curated exclusively for digital tourism marketers. Subscribe today to receive The Travel Vertical in your inbox each week.
Awesome. So, Lori Jo Miller-Farr has just done an amazing job with both the Travel Vertical every week and the podcast, and she's been so kind as to give me a handful of some trivia questions that we'll be asking throughout the course of the day. And so, anybody that successfully answers some of these questions as we in the chat as we go through this afternoon, everybody that has a successful answer will have their name dropped in for a free registration to the Tourism Summit event in Orlando. So I encourage you to please be active on the chat, say hey to everybody. And the first trivia question we have is, what destination created its own color with the pen?
Listen, I've traveled every road in this here land. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere.
Lori will be monitoring the calls and monitoring all the chats, and we'll let you know if you get it right. So we'll give you a second here before we move on and give you that answer and head to our first presentation of the day. All right. So the destination that created their own color with Pantene Color Institute was Discover Puerto Rico. Amazing campaign, amazing program. And the color that they created in partnership, I think, with the Ketchum Group was Puerto Rico Sunshine. So congratulations, if you guys guessed Discover Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico Sunshine. So now it's time, I think, to move on and move to our first speaker of the day. I'm so thankful to have so many amazing partners. And without those partners, we certainly wouldn't be able to do events like we're doing today and do the live event in Orlando. Our first presentation today is from Andrea Godfrey, the Senior Vice President of Longwoods International. And there's no organization, I think, that has had their fingertip on the pulse of what's happening in the travel industry over the course of this pandemic. I think coming up on 2 years of their bi-weekly survey in partnership with Miles. So with that, I'm really excited to hand the podium over to Andrea Godfrey with Longwoods International.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here on the first of this series and to be talking about where our industry, or at least the American traveler, is headed in 2022. I know many destinations and travel businesses with us today have already seen the travel rebound that has been happening. And that's what we're going to dig into today is where that is going in 2022. And one thing that we found very interesting throughout the pandemic is that what travelers have told us they're going to do and the resulting travel has aligned quite closely. And really, travel sentiment and being close to the traveler has really boded well for us as an industry in terms of knowing where we're headed and how we can pivot throughout the recovery. So a lot of the data I'm going to be showing today is coming from our American Travel Sentiment Study that we've been doing in partnership with the Miles Group. We have been running this study since March of 2020. We are actually 56 waves in. In fact, those of y'all that are on the webinar today, you're going to be seeing some of the data that you'll be seeing released tomorrow, so a bit of a sneak peek. But essentially, we go out and we talk to 1,000 US adults every other week, and we ask them about their travel plans for future, what's keeping them from travel and what's getting them to go over the last year. And that is that American travelers plan to take to the airways and take the roads. Since March of 2021, we've seen that 9 in 10 American travelers plan to take a trip in the upcoming 6 months. And what's notable about this is when we look at this trend line industry that's really resonated with me throughout this time is that the pandemic has really shown us that this desire for travel really is essentially pandemic proof. Now, that's not to mean that people don't delay their travel or cancel and make their trips look a little different, but this desire for travel really is something that is really ingrained in the American travel spirit. And so when we look out and we ask Americans when their next trip is, we see that 39% actually plan to travel in the next from now within the next month to 2 months from now. So this really bodes well when we talk about heading into that spring break and that Easter holiday travel season. And of course, we see right under a third there that are planning to travel the next 3 to 5 months, which is going to bleed into that summer travel season. And I want to bring up a slide here from a prior wave that was during the time of Omicron. And so, as I previously mentioned, 9 in 10 American travelers have intended to take a trip in the next 6 months for the last almost a year now. So, when we look at the Omicron variant, we look back at this back in the start of January, we saw that a quarter of American travelers said that, you know what, I'm still traveling. And only a third actually said that they were planning to postpone their trip. And so this is really important when we talk about demand not ceasing. Demand is going to shift. And looking at, especially when we talk about new variants that might come on and come in, such as BA2, it's important to note that travel demand is not going to be quelled, but it might be shifted slightly, but that demand is there, it's endemic, and it's very strong. So when we talk about what's impacting plans to travel, in the last 2 years, it's really been dominated by COVID-19. But when we ask travelers, and we've asked travelers for the last 2 years about 3 factors impacting their decisions to take a trip, 3 that are very important, and that's, of course, the coronavirus, the COVID-19, concerns about personal financial situation, and transportation cost. And in our wave, when we spoke to American travelers just last week, when we look at the top 2 box ratings here, we see that actually concerns about personal financial situations and transportation costs actually are a little bit higher than what we see around COVID-19. When we talk about those personal financial situations outside of a dip that we saw in terms of the concern in March of last year, we've seen this sit really around that 25 to 27% mark. And this is something that we should really keep an eye on, also coupled with transportation cost concerns. When we talk about inflation, we also talk about the geopolitical space on a global scale, and we talk about cost of gas and other products and services that would be related to transportation costs. We should really keep an eye on this. And so when we look at the coronavirus and persons that say that it greatly impacts their decision to travel in the next 6 months, we see it's right at 25%. So when we look at these 3 factors, what we've seen over time is that now we're settling into the point where coronavirus is really sitting right in par with those financial considerations whenever we're talking about what's impacting people's decision to travel. Now, COVID-19 is actually not only shifting people's decisions to travel or not to travel, but it's shifting how they travel. And that's really what's most important to us right now when we talk about travel demand and travel into the next year, is that demand is there, travel is happening, but factors influencing travel is evolving, and what they're deciding to do is starting to stabilize as well. And so when we look at this, we see 34% say that COVID-19 is actually not impacting their decision to travel. This is actually down 10 points compared to the same time last year. And something that's very important to look here is that only 6% say that they're canceling a trip. So when you consider the fact that at the peak of Omicron, we only had a small share of travelers that were saying, you know what, I'm going to postpone. I'm not going to cancel. And we look at today and we only see 6% are actually canceling. This bode well for us whenever we talk about demand on an annual level here. And when we look, we continue to see that right around a quarter of persons are choosing to drive as opposed to fly. And interestingly, we see that 25% are saying that in the next 6 months, they're deciding to stay in the US instead of traveling internationally. Now, this data point right here becomes really important because when we talk about the share of wallet available for those US travelers that are actually deciding to stay in the US, we're talking about a share of wallet that we have the potential to grab that is larger than often what people spend on a domestic trip. So this is a very valuable segment. We'll talk about what this shift is going to look like here in a bit. So travel demand is back, and I get the question a lot of what pandemic trends have we seen that have arisen during the pandemic that are going to continue with us as we start to move to the endemic and beyond. And so we've been asking throughout this time on the first trip or the next trip that you're going to take, what are you going to do on this trip? And we continue to see that 2/3 are planning to take to the road. So it's going to involve some type of road trip. And beyond that, when we look at this, we see that nearly 2 in 5 trips that people plan to take, the first trip in 2022 as well as in 2021, is to reconnect, to visit their friend and relative. And so really the only shifts that I'm just going to highlight, because this is a busy chart, of the only shifts that we really saw was that there was a little bit of a take from those that are choosing to travel by car within 200 miles to see friends and relatives to those that are opting to get on a plane. While really and truly we're looking at about a 3-point differential here. So something that's really interesting that we've seen throughout the pandemic is not only that VFR travels, that visiting friends and relative, is not only a very important travel segment for us because that's really a lot of the travel that we saw happening, but also we saw a little bit of a change in behavior. And so what we saw with domestic travelers from 2020 through to 2021 is that VFR travel actually became more valuable. We saw that primary purpose of trip was to go and connect. But what we saw is that they weren't staying with those friends and relatives as often, and they were getting out and doing a lot more. And so that dollar value of that VFR traveler increased during this time. And this is really a trend that we hope to see to continue as people continue to say that a primary driver to get them to take that next trip is to connect and to spend time with their friends and relatives, even though they're not often staying with them and they're doing more within our community. And so wrapping in that VFR trip to be more of an activity-based and at leisure trip. So a topic that's really important for us when we talk about moving to that endemic phase and we talk about economic recovery is employment. And you might be saying, wait, she's talking about employment, and we actually have a slide here that's talking about service level expectations. But this is something that we've been keeping a pulse on that is very important for us to keep an eye on here. And so what we looked at here and we've been asking is, what is the level of service that you are expecting in your upcoming trip in the next 3 months? And what we've seen is that where those that are saying I'm expecting a lower level of service has remained relatively stable. What we've noticed in our wave that went out recently is here that there's a shift from the same level of service to those saying that they're expecting a slightly higher level of service. So 36% are saying that they're expecting a higher level of service. And when we're talking about the fact that a lot of our businesses, especially those hospitality businesses, are operating with lower staff, it's harder for us to deliver those types of services that our travelers are looking for. And so it's really important that we keep an eye on this, especially as we talk about bringing back our workforce and the service and the experiences that we're offering our guests, because the pandemic opened up a lot of opportunity for new visitors to come into, first-time visitors into our communities. And it's important that we keep them coming back. And that means that we're meeting their expectations. So as we know, outbound travel remains impacted compared to those pre-pandemic trends. So we still have that small share of American travelers that in the next 6 months are saying, you know what, I'm going to stay domestic instead of going internationally. And so, but American travelers are starting to travel internationally once more. And so I wanted to spend some time in taking a look at this. And so when we look and we ask about American travelers planning to take a trip internationally in the next 12 months, we see that that's right under 30% are planning to travel in the next 12 months. And when we look at what that trip is going to look like, primarily it's going to be that trip from 1 to 3 weeks that they're going to take overseas. So really and truly, or internationally, excuse me, because obviously Canada and Mexico is definitely international as well. And so what we're seeing here is those trips of 1 to 3 weeks for those travelers that are planning to take that international trip. Now, when we look out and we look at further out for a 24-month trend here, we see that slightly more than half of American travelers are actually planning to take an international trip in the next 2 years. So when we start to look at these percentages and do the math on it, what we can see is this is going to be a rollout of American travelers starting to take more of those trips internationally over the next 2 years. When we talk about specifically in the short term for the next 6 months, there's definitely that opportunity there. And so we, in this most recent wave, we asked those American travelers who are planning to travel abroad where they're planning on going. And we see primarily they're planning on going to Europe and the Caribbean islands, followed by our northern and southern neighbors, Mexico and Canada. And we can see some of those further away continents there as well, being some of those destinations of choice. So what I think is interesting here, so when we talk about the value of going after and capturing that American traveler that's planning to stay domestically instead of internationally, we asked the question, compared to the 2 years prior to the pandemic, how do you plan on spending on international travel in the next 2 years? And we saw that 26% are actually planning to spend to some degree less than what they spent before the pandemic. So not only do we have in the short term or medium term here, 6 months, a share of American travelers that are saying instead of spending that money overseas, they're going to stay in the US. When we look over the next 2 years, we actually see that they're planning on opening their wallets a little bit less than pre-pandemic for international, which really continues to create this opportunity for us and really not only capturing an increasing domestic demand, but also capturing that share of domestic travel or those domestic travelers that are opting to stay here in the US. And even if they are going overseas, they're not opening their wallets quite as much for those international trips, which creates that opportunity for US destinations. So at Longwoods, for those of y'all familiar with our research, you'll know that we're very close to a great deal of resident sentiment work and really focusing on the resident perspective. And the pandemic really created this opportunity where the resident really moved front and center for us as a travel industry. They became not only the beneficiary, the continued beneficiary of the economic benefits of travel and tourism, but also they were our first traveler. And so I'd be remiss to not talk about our residents when we talk about what the future of travel looks like for 2022. And so what we're seeing is some pandemic highs in terms of support for opening up communities to visitors. And so this is really important when we talk about friendliness of local communities as being a deciding factor when picking a destination to visit. It's really important that our communities are on board with opening up our communities and welcoming those visitors in. And we see that 70% feel safe dining in local restaurants and shopping in local retail stores. Now, whenever we talk about opening up our communities, we talk about word of mouth for visiting friends and relatives, and we talk about bringing back that workforce. It's important that our community members feel comfortable getting out and engaging with their community first, because they're not going to welcome their friends and relatives in if they don't feel comfortable getting out themselves within our community, and they're not going to feel comfortable going back to work. And when we talk about shopping local and supporting local, this really is something that is ingrained in the American domestic traveler. And really, when we look at why they're shopping local, they want to buy and support local and small businesses, and they really enjoy the experiences that they provide for them. And so we're going to continue to see American travelers really engaging with that type of local businesses when they are traveling here in the US in the upcoming year. So as I mentioned, this is a preview of some of the research that we're going to be releasing tomorrow, but you can go to our or the Miles Partnerships website to dig into this data in a little bit more detail. And so with that, thank you for your time and look forward to the upcoming presentations today.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that amazing insight into the sentiments of American travelers. And I want to, again, just thank you at Longwoods and Miles for the 2 years of that information. That's been really remarkable to see how the travel industry has come together to help each other out. And I also have to thank so many of the other industry leaders that have been continuously providing updated information to us so we can make the most informed decisions possible. And that's been from literally all of the eTourism Summit sponsors have been really remarkable in their sharing of insights, of research. It's just a true testament to the power of the community, and I want to thank you all. So, thanks again for that presentation. We're really looking forward to again sharing the best of the best of digital tourism marketing at eTourism Summit in June with the ETSI Awards. This is the 4th annual running of the ETSI Awards, and I want to thank 2 other sponsors, Zardico and Expedia Group Media Solutions, for hosting that. I'd encourage all of you to work with your clients and work with the best work that you've had to share it with the community. It's been one of the hallmarks of eTourism Summit is the sharing of best practices, lessons learned, and the best work that we have. It's a hallmark of the travel vertical as well. So certainly would like to encourage you all. I think we have until March 25th for all the entries to the ETSI Awards, and we'll show a quick video of what the ETSI Awards are all about.
It's fantastic to see the innovation and the awards that went to folks from all over the world. Is just really humbling for us to be a part of that. When you've got countries and you've got DMOs and states up there winning awards for great work during a very difficult time, it's really humbling for us to be a part of that.
You've got to be in it to win it. The call for entries is open now through March 25th.
So, we'll
go to the eTourism website to apply
March
today.
March 25th deadline. Certainly encourage you to submit the best work. It's a great way to celebrate everything that we do as an industry, and again, to continue to learn from each other. All right, the next trivia question from Lori is pretty interesting as well, coming from the travel vertical. What destination created its own soundtrack with local artists to suggest what the place sounds like? Put your answers in the chat box. Again, correct answers will have a chance to win a free registration to eTourism Summit.
I breathe the mountain air, man. Travel, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. I've been to Boston, Charleston, Dayton, Louisiana, Washington, Houston, Kingston, Texarkana, Monterey.
Excellent. So the answer for this one is Sonoma Sounds from Sonoma County Tourism, California. Congratulations to all you guys that got that right. It's again, incredible work coming out of amazing destinations. One thing I wanted to share for all of you that participated in eTourism Summit last year and the entire 2 years of webinars that we put together on from eTourism Summit, and it's all now available on the app, the ETS 365 app. You can go to Google Store or Apple Store and just search for eTourism Summit 365. All that content is available on the new ETS 365 platform for you to go back and look at some of the good insights that we had over the course of the last year, and certainly through eTourism Summit last year. When pandemic first started, I started a bi-weekly or a weekly actually webinar series every Wednesday afternoon, and hosted that with a good friend of mine, Josh Collins with Zydeco, and really had some incredible conversations throughout the course of the pandemic. And I think the reason that's so important is we're able to keep the industry connected and learn together as so many things happened. And it's was a powerful tool. We're all busier now. There's a lot more to do, so that's why we've kind of shifted to the straight to the point series, which we'll be doing quarterly, both before and after the live and in-person event. So right now, I'm thrilled to hand over the stage to a good friend, Josh Collins, the head of product, community, and education at Zydeco, and an amazing panel of CEOs and tourism marketers to carry on that conversation of did this pandemic change KPIs, and what are destinations taking away moving forward? So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
All right, being such a gracious host. It's a lot of fun to participate in these sessions, and I know we have become quite, used to these virtual. Great to see you all today. How is life in your various parts of the world? How are y'all doing?
Beautiful day in paradise.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Vicky, how about you? I see you're in your lovely room full of light, as we were getting set up here a few moments ago, right? So good to see you.
Thank you. 75 degrees on a February day. Not too shabby.
I love it. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. This is a great conversation. Again, heartfelt thanks from all of us at Zydeco for joining us. And those of you that are tuning in, right, you might be noticing we are missing a face. Mitch, of course, our dear good friend from Visit Fort Worth, was unable to join us today. So no big deal. We're going to move ahead as planned and give a big shout out to Mitch, of course, because we love his participation, and he's definitely a great thought leader in our space. So Mitch, you may be catching this later. No hard feelings. You can buy me a beverage later, and it'll make up for it. But no, in all seriousness, we're glad to be here, of course, today, talking about out with the old, in with the new, right? We want results. Like what's happening? We certainly have become quite accustomed to, the change in our environment, and change, both continual change, constant change, even change that sometimes, just has really made us go, oh my gosh, can somebody please just rescue me from all of this nonsense, right? I mean, it has been hard at times. And so we want to kind of dive into that a little bit more today. And one of the things, with Zartico, those of you that may be familiar with us, others that maybe aren't so much, right? We are now working with over 100 destinations, really specifically focused on providing the clearest view of the visitor economy, right? Allowing and building, an integrated data model that only we have, that gives us insight into what's happening in near real time of your visitor economy, right? So we got some great stories we're going to talk about, but what we've learned, right? That's what we kind of try to love to lean into. We're constantly learning new things, constantly thinking about how do we innovate and do things better. And through all this, through these, couple of years, and through the certainly years and years of experience of many of us on the Zartico side that have come from the DMO world, myself included, we've kind of began to see these common themes. They start to show up over and over and over again. And you're going to hear about some of these from Vicki and Marlise and Todd in here just a second, but they really have been condensed into what we call these foundations of a contemporary DMO, right? These are things that you're all doing this already. Every single one of you, whether you're watching this, in real time, or you're catching a replay later, you all do this to some degree. We know we're always going to be about demand generation, raising awareness, driving demand. That's of course why we exist. COVID has really now helped us think a little bit more about things like visitor distribution and economic opportunity. How do we create a level loaded visitor economy, year-round visitation, right? How do we ensure that the visitors that come to our destinations, that at least the activities that we are doing, right? And how all of our departments are working together, those activities align such that the experience that visitors receive, certainly, they want to go where people love to live, right? So if we're too weighted in one season or another, or certain weekends, or things like this, right? We often can unintentionally create or allow for negative visitor experiences and things like that. So visitor distribution is key. Really seeing what times of the year do people visit one side of our destination or another, or one area, or so on and so forth. Again, through economic opportunity, really getting very granular and understanding about the visitor economy. What is that? How do we maximize that? How do we understand where our visitors are coming from, again, and what are they doing, their impact on our destination? And then accountability and stability. Again, we've been doing this for a long time in the industry, so none of this is probably not a surprise or shock to anybody, but accountability, right, is all about trust, shared scorecards, right? Transparency, things like this. And we've existed in this place for a long time. So certainly none of this is new. Stability, thinking about how can we ensure that our funding, and again, we're not putting ourselves as much as risk as perhaps what we may have experienced before COVID, right? So the big buckets here. But for today's conversation, we're kind of going to lean into that accountability one a little bit more. And so you're going to hear from each one of our great panelists and some things, what they've learned, different KPIs, new things they're doing, how they're holding themselves and their teams and staffs and organizations and stakeholders, right? In new accountable ways, right? And things like that. So really, really fun stuff. We're going to dive right in. Y'all don't need to hear me talk anymore. I'm going to turn it over to Todd here next. And then Todd, I think you're going to take us forward. Again, accountability, that's where we're going to focus in a little bit today. Just great panelists. I'm so thankful that y'all are here. Seriously, you honor me just by showing up and being here. I know so just want to say a deep-hearted appreciation for that. And then Todd, why don't you kick us off, take us forward.
Great, thanks, Josh, and happy to be here and with you, Vicki and Marlise. So think about it, everybody. All the data available now presents this unique turning point in our industry. We can't change history, but we can use history to change our approach to the future. So we're actually lucky as DMOs to be in a time where we have access to so much more technology that brings in data to help us make better decisions, not just about budgets, but about our teams, our staffing, and even how we drive visitor action. So moving on to the next slide. think of it, so many of our stakeholders are confused about the language we use. Some of them are even angry at how we act as DMOs today. They're looking at us through an industry lens that literally comes from the 90s and the 2000s. And that doesn't mean 30 years of knowledge is bad, but they're not looking at it through a contemporary lens. So if we move on to the next slide, life was super easy with measurement, here it comes, of ADR, RevPAR, daily spending, occupancy. Our partners started to understand demand and clicks, but they're now comfortable with those. For us, though, moving on to the slide there with UGC, we have a whole new vernacular. We're using terms like UGC, POIs, retargeting, sales funnels, reach, more, engagement. It's hard for them to keep up. And when they're in those old lenses, it can make them feel uncomfortable. So a great example would be, I'm not even on that slide, but we'll stick there. A great example was yesterday, and true story, I was reviewing our Google Analytics for the week, and I saw an incredible spike in lift during a 2-hour period just on Tuesday afternoon. So I checked out the results of what we did in a small targeted email campaign that went out at a unique time for us. And our opens were over 57%. Clicks were over 15%. It was amazing. So I went into the newsletter and I looked at the heat map. I wanted to know what created this activity that was astounding. It was unique. And I was able to find out that our marketing team actually did something different in the newsletter they hadn't done before just for this specific audience. So I grabbed our creative director and we had a great conversation about how to use all that information for the future of not only our targeted newsletter campaigns, but our social campaigns, and how we use all of the data available to us to determine what that information is and why it gave us this like special perception. And that's not a conversation we were having just a few years ago. It's kind of a new thing for everybody. It's almost going from 2D to 3D. So here, these tools for measurement, it's part of our daily regime. Think of it, we're all now spending our days slacking each other, strategizing over Slack, sharing Zartico files and snapshots and Bandwango files and this file on Dropbox. And here we are Zooming. And then we get on Zoom again to strategize after. So the process may be a lot more complex, but it's literally 10 times more productive. What's cool about these new tools, though, is how we communicate and share those results with our stakeholders and our funding sources. So we use a lot of these tools to meet with our government officials locally to show the impact. We actually recently layered a Zartico report with a weekly star report with a few other reports to show how it impacted the tax activity in different sectors, because it's not just occupancy anymore, it's retail, it's transportation, it's dining, all combined. And the result of that was that the city, we put a request in for a grant, and they gave us a huge ARPA grant that extends over 2 years, almost doubling our efforts for tourism in the coming years. So moving on to the next slide, we look at Google results by city. We've got this unique nexus of technology and opportunity, and we will launch a social campaign targeted based on what Google's telling us today, where people come from that are looking at us. We then do some A/B testing. We'll watch that engagement. And sometimes 2-3 weeks later, we're going to be looking at the results again, using whether it be a Zartico or an Epsilon report and credit card activity, and saying what we did then had an impact 2 weeks later, 1 week later. Let's talk to those markets at this time, and this time when we want to generate a specific activity that may be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now. So the data is giving us an opportunity to do real-time applications of our marketing efforts on top of everything else we do. So we even changed the way we communicate, moving on to the next slide. And we all know there's a bunch of beer trails out there. There's this trail, that trail. We changed our language there too as well, because we used data to see how our consumers were reacting to all of our posts and our ads. So now we have a taco quest. We have a mural walk, because they're active campaigns. They actually bring the user in. And what's cool about the tools we have now is we can track what happens when they're here. So we can watch that heat map. We can see what restaurants they're going to or retail shops, and either target more people like that or not. Moving on to the next slide. We've even changed how we communicate little things like a tour. And think about, are we on to the next one? There we go. So we've heard the term tour for years and years and years. Well, the recent travel trends are telling us that people are jumping in their car and they're doing more trips. So we changed our terminology from tour to cruise, like an almond blossom cruise, where people can be with their little pod, their loved ones, their family in a car, and then go out on an active tour. It's actually going on right now. And today I was watching the traffic out there and seeing what POIs people are going to. It's helping us sell advertising for next year's Almond Blossom Cruise. It's pretty amazing how we can use that data in real time and also change some of the terminology that we speak to our consumers about to create actions. With all of us right now being in this unique travel market coming out of the pandemic, I don't think that driving is going to slow down. I think the drive market's going to last a long time. And then moving on to the next slide, we even changed the term shows. So think of it. We've all been streaming shows for 2 years in our living room in our pajamas. So now we talk about live events. And we create our advertising, and we do a lot of A/B testing in real time about these live events and use images and pictures that draw people into these live events. And again, we continue to track those POIs. We use the heat maps. We use some of the Zartico data that comes in on top of all the other engagement tools. And what's even more cool is we can watch the UGC right there in real time and see what we did to stimulate that. So it's not just about what's cool. And then moving on to the next slide, it's about history. So we all have community events that may have been around for 20 years or more. We have one specifically here, and we partnered with Zartico. We used a couple other data reports, and we were able to layer multiple years of this huge community event that everybody thought, it's a great tourism event. Visitors come from miles around. We've all heard that 100 times. We were able to sit down with our stakeholders with real data and say, here are the results. And it may be an awesome community event. You can see that it's residents attending, but it's not really an awesome tourism event. So when we apply those hundreds of hours of labor, tens of thousands of dollars of marketing, it's not having an impact. We want to redirect those resources elsewhere. And then our stakeholders are involved in the decision, which is incredible. But we use technology, we use these new data tools to actually be able to make that decision with our community instead of being left out in the cold and saying, we don't want to do that anymore. Now it's a community decision. And then lastly, it's all about stories. Next slide. We use the data to create stories here and how we create them visually in our marketing, on air, in our national public radio campaigns and things like that. And our partners, they're kind of curious, but keep in mind what Dave Chappelle said, that all change is uncomfortable until it's comfortable. So, to us, that's the story. I'm sticking to it.
I love it, Todd. Thank you for the Chappelle reference. Yes, always. To do or not to do, use a Chappelle reference. It should be to do, always, right? That's what I think too, for sure. So good stuff. God, Todd, that is so awesome. I love how you how you've shaped this, right? How you've taken it, how you moved from one place to the next. It's so great, so cool. I'm gonna come back for some questions at the end. So let's keep moving though, so we'll save time. And Marlise, turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. I'm going to provide just a little bit of a different look in terms of how our KPIs have changed over the last, not even 2 years, honestly, but over the last 5 years or so, and talk to you a little bit about how we've changed what we do because of the change in KPIs. So the next slide. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit first about our old KPIs, pre-2018 or so, and then talk about some newer ones or what we were really measuring and looking at, in the last several years, and then our newest KPIs after we began working with Zydeco over the last year or so. So next slide. So this is current data, but this is what we may have looked at pre-2018. So prior to then, the only monthly data that we had available to us to help us understand the health of the tourism economy in a timely manner was STR data, was commercial lodging data. So we had our annual visitor spending reports and our tourism satellite accounts and things like that, our visitor profiles on an annual basis. But, monthly data was really hard to get. And so STR really served that purpose. And, other than the Department of Revenue sales data, this was the most timely data. It was what we could report to our partners and to our board. Again, this is current data, but this is kind of what it would have looked like, what I may have presented to our board of directors pre-2018. Of course, we had other KPIs related to our PR efforts and our marketing and advertising, again, visitor spending and profile stats. But in terms of how tourism was going, the health of the industry, this was really what we used. This is still great for us, and it's still one of our top KPIs. So I don't want it to seem like we're not using it anymore. After all, about 70% of lodging revenues in North Carolina come from those commercial properties. So it's still very important KPI for us. I will say that we have begun using, shared economy data, vacation rental data. So we've really added to it. So it's not like we really dropped KPIs, but we broadened them, I would say. Let me focus on one little KPI of the lodging data. We typically look at demand, whereas a local CVB or DMO may look at occupancy or supply. We understand that we can't really affect rates at this state level DMO. We can't affect supply and inventory, but what we can have an effect on is demand. And so what we kind of moved into in 2018 was looking at demand or room nights sold in terms of the commercial lodging, so the STR data. We use AirDNA for looking at those shared economy, those Airbnb and VRBO home rentals. And we also look at vacation rentals. There's a significant portion of our state that really don't have hotels. A lot of our communities and destinations along the coast rely on those vacation rentals. So we knew that we had to get data that reflected that part of our industry geographically, as well as seasonally. So we look at these monthly indicators by region in North Carolina. We have several regions throughout the state, from the mountains to the coast. So again, it's a little more broad in terms of the visitor economy, but you could see how we looked at different types of lodging. Again, this is current data, but this is what I would have looked at a few years ago. And we still do, but we've added to that. So the next slide.
My computer's moving slow, I think, is my problem.
That's okay. I can start talking and we'll get to it. So during the pandemic, and really shortly before the pandemic, we started looking at it. But with the prevalence of geolocation data in the industry, we knew that it was time to get our feet wet with this type of data. So we began working with Zydeco and their partnership with Near Data. And we realized quickly that the volatility of the mobile data was presenting a picture that could be difficult to explain if we looked at it daily at the state level. I understand it's different at the local level. But we also realized that lodging was not the only metric by which we could gauge the health of the industry in North Carolina. So looking at just mobile data or looking at just lodging data to help us better understand the visitor economy as a whole and on a more regular basis than, say, our annual visitor spending data, we worked with Zydeco to create a visitor economy index. So this index here is comprised of those STR data, the demand, which we feel like we can impact at the state level marketing office, the revenues, which are impacted by demand, right? We looked at the credit card data available through Zydeco, and we also looked at those AirDNA data as well. So the index is made up of these specific parts. And Darnico was really great, ran some regression analysis for us to really help us understand, the weighting for each of these specific indicators within the index. And so this is what you see here. So what the index shows is performance as compared to same time last year. So you could see from January 2020, just shortly before the pandemic, through the pandemic, again, each one of these data points looks back a year, and then into the recovery here. So we really feel like this visitor economy index shows the health of the tourism industry in North Carolina better than looking at one single piece, one single KPI. While they're all important, we feel like we really needed a way to pull them all together. So the next slide. So in addition, so the visitor index is not our only KPI, but in addition, we do look at proportion of out-of-state visitors daily and spend by day. So I overlaid the spend on top of this graph that shows the proportion of out-of-state visitors, because I really wanted to see how the spending changed based on that ratio of in-state versus out-of-state. We've always known that out-of-state visitors spend more through our visitor profile studies, but this is really a game changer to be able to look at this on a weekly or monthly level. This is something that we'll have much sooner, and we're able to shift gears much more quickly in terms of our marketing. If we see, out-of-state visitors from a certain market are spending, more, and I'm going to get to that on another slide, but I think this is really going to be a game changer, is looking at the proportion of in-state versus out-of-state, and then the related spending by these visitors. So this is really exciting for us. And this is a little bit about what I was talking about, being able to look at it looks like my destinations cut off just a little bit there, but that's okay. So you can see not just our top visitation markets in North Carolina. I think this is like the last month I pulled from our dashboard, but how those top markets are spending. So we know who, in January and February, it's more of a slow time in North Carolina, but we can see there's a lot of in-state visitation that are spending most of the money there. And then we can see the visitor spending by category. So, do we need to work with our, specialty retail businesses, or do we need to work with our accommodations or attractions? Or, it's really great to be able to look at this on an ongoing basis. And then the next slide, I think, is similar to that, but it really helps us understand that spending by market, by merchant category. So we can look here at, Raleigh-Durham is the top spending market, and they are neck and neck with Charlotte market for accommodations. So while they're spending more in total, Charlotte is just barely edging out Raleigh-Durham resident visitors in terms of lodging spending. That's just one example. The Jacksonville, Florida, I'm still looking into, trying to figure out what's going on, but they really did some retail spending in the last month. And we know Jacksonville is a top market for us in the summer to our mountains, but it's interesting to see that they were here, in the winter in North Carolina, spending a lot of money, especially in retail. So, I think this is going to really change the way that we are able to shift. And I hate the word pivot, but, pivot more quickly in terms of where we're placing our marketing dollars and what markets we're placing them in, and what individual, categories we will focus on through our marketing efforts. That's all I have, but I'm excited to hear more questions and hear more from our other panel presenters.
I love it, Marlise. This is so good. I too, I'm glad you're loving the Visitor Economy Index so much too, because I know with our team, we've spent a lot of time developing that and are rolling that out to all of our Zartico partners very, very soon. So really excited to be adding that piece, and so thankful for you and your patience and working with us as we've developed it and tested it, and really put a lot of hours and data science into understanding and how we can give greater value to all of our partners. So I'm really excited for that. And just love that how you transition everything, even with your stakeholders as well, right? So Victoria, let me turn it over to you next.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I always appreciate doing stuff like this. It's cheaper than therapy, is basically what it is.
Yes,
so thanks again. Why don't we kick it off to the next slide, please? All right. So let me kind of set the table for you a little bit about sort of Visit Williamsburg. So it's been in its current iteration since July 1 of 2018. It was created by statute and it replaced a marketing program that was once administered by the local Chamber of Commerce. So you can imagine that, that kind of reorganization is always an interesting process to go through. And because of how we're funded, we're actually a public body of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we have to adhere to all of the things that any other state agency would, like the Freedom of Information Act and the Procurement Act and conflict of all of the acts, right, that any state agency needs to follow. So we were created to drive overnight visitation and essentially stop the triage some of the bleeding that was taking place. This was a destination that hadn't surpassed 50% occupancy since 2007. And that was the 400th anniversary of this region, which is known as the Historic Triangle. And the Queen of England was here, and and that was the last time we had surpassed 50%. So this program was created to kind of help stop some of that bleeding that had been taking place over the past 30 years or so. So I arrived on the scene in April of 2019, and we had a big job to do, and a big part of that was educating stakeholders and kind of course correcting a little bit. So if you go to the next slide, in 2019, we launched an interim ad campaign. We reorganized the shop that had been in place. I call it a startup with baggage because, it probably would have been easier if it were purely a startup, right? We went out to bid for every contracted partner that we work with, and we did 5 procurement processes in 2019 on that second half. Photo shoots, we implemented new process, and we developed KPIs for reporting. We ended up ending the year in 2019 above that 50% occupancy level, and we were able to share some metrics that were a little more current, one might say. And in 2020, bookings look strong. We were poised for another record-breaking year, and then COVID, and we pulled all of our advertising and all of that good stuff. Next slide. And so we knew that we kind of needed to go back to the drawing board. We had an opportunity, right? So out of chaos, sometimes opportunities are created. And so we sat back for a hot second and thought, how are we going to move forward? Next slide. And in the early months of COVID, we continued to build out our strategy for the eventual relaunch of our advertising. We were very optimistic, and we knew that we had an opportunity here to build a longer-term campaign than the interim efforts that we had launched in 2019. And so we utilized all of our research partners, data sources. We used research produced by trade associations like U.S. Travel. And we put together, our strategy for the future. Next slide. And so we began to think through, what does our new creative look like? How is it going to perform? All of the things that you do as you're developing a new advertising campaign. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see where we landed in our creative platform that we developed was reuniting with what truly matters. Now, a lot of the work that we had done was during COVID, during those early months of COVID. But we felt at the end of the day, even beyond COVID, reuniting with what truly matters is what sort of drives that decision-making process when you're choosing a travel destination, right? Mm-hmm. And where are you going to be the best version of yourself for that week or 2 weeks that you have to, enjoy life a little bit, right? So we developed our creative platform. If you go to the next one, and Life at Your Pace was created. We were, like I said, we were optimistic that it couldn't last forever, right? People would travel again someday, but we knew it wasn't going to happen quickly, and that everybody was going to respond to their own comfort levels and at their own pace. So Life at Your Pace was born. We launched in June of 2020 with Life at Your Pace, and we were the first destination in Virginia to resume its marketing efforts, and one of the first in the country. And like I said, we knew a small population or a small percentage of the population would travel, but for us, it was critical that we continue to raise awareness about Williamsburg and continue to shift perception, right? It's not just a bunch of, folks in colonial garb churning butter, right? There's a whole lot else to do here. History is in our DNA. It will always be in our DNA, but there's other stuff too, right? So we absolutely needed to reignite that momentum that we had created in 2019. And we had a big job to do. We were a brand new DMO. We were created because there was a tax increase that was wildly unpopular. And so we had a lot to kind of report and talk about. And so next slide. We launched a $7.6 million effort back in that month of June, and we included a new tactic. We engaged influencers. We wanted to show followers firsthand, that Williamsburg was reopening safely. And we also, if you go to the next slide, and you can kind of clip through the next two, we created some new content partnerships with Golf and National Geographic. And again, just trying to tell the story in a different, more modern way than this destination had done in the past. But if you go to the next slide, this is where the rubber hits the road, right? We needed to prove that this brand new DMO is getting the job done. And so measuring, optimizing, and repeating. But if you go to the next slide, you can see that it went well beyond occupancy and it went well beyond sort of return on investment. And on the next slide, I've used sort of, everybody is very familiar with the old STAR report. And then I also included this one-sheeter that I would hand out to legislators when I was the state tourism director of New Hampshire. And the information's good. There's nothing wrong with it. The study is legit, and but it doesn't look as kind of what I'm sharing with stakeholders today. And you can, there you go. And here we go. We're able to share with our stakeholders now in real time what our top 5 in-state and out-of-state origin markets are. And on the next slide, we pull heat maps that visualize where visitors are traveling from. And on the next slide, you'll see some of how we report our visitor spending trends. And so we're sharing, again, some real-time information based on cardholder data with our stakeholders, and they can see exactly where those tourism dollars are being spent. And on the next slide, kind of one of my new favorite metrics to use is sort of that visitor to resident ratio. And I love sharing this with restaurants that believe that tourism isn't important and that only locals dine in their establishments. And it's like, well, actually, no, there's, double the amount of visitors to residents. So have to think that some of those folks who are traveling to the area are eating in your dining establishment. And not, now it's more important than ever that we really take a look at not just sort of those performance metrics, but then how do we shift, right? How do we shift things, change things on a dime when they're not working or if they're underperforming? And so we use things like this visitor resident makeup. And this is a great example of a beautiful park, and only 20% of those who went to that park during that time period were visitors. So that tells me we need to do a much better job at marketing our green spaces and the parks that exist here in the region. This is another great example of content and how it resonates, and we can drill down by market. And so again, duplicating and replicating what works, getting rid of what doesn't, forward-thinking stuff, right? And then this is a pretty cool visualization. William and Mary, which is the nation's second oldest university here. This is a great heat map to show move-in weekend. And what this said to me, sadly, is that, and 50% of the folks who were here were visitors. So they were from beyond 30 miles of the area. And they're not leaving campus, right? So we need to do a better job at talking to the parents of students as they're preparing for move-in weekend. So some really kind of interesting tools that we've been able to utilize as we've moved ahead here in the last year or so. And again, it's not just about performance anymore, right? It's about informing decision-making in a very precise way. So again, thanks for having me.
This was your video.
There's our 15-second spot. There you go. You can see life at your pace come to life. So
I love how Google sometimes makes these things more complicated than they need to be, right?
yeah, story of my life.
Excellent stuff, Vicki. Thank you so much. And Todd and Marlise, both of you, all of you, really fantastic stuff. I mean, certainly you each have talked about, to a degree, acknowledging things were done one way, right? And now doing things a new way. Each of you have kind of articulated that differently. I'm curious, have you, I can only imagine, let me maybe reframe it like this. I can only imagine those that might be watching might go, yeah, that's great, that's working for them, right? Or something like that. But my stakeholders never let me talk about what I really want to talk about because they're so fascinated on this particular KPI or something like that. So I'm just curious, what's your experience been like as you've been introducing these new kind of KPIs to those stakeholders? Have you encountered any kind of potential difficulty there?
Sometimes I want to be blindfolded like I'm on a firing line.
Really?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for the stakeholders who are not engaged in contemporary data analytics to embrace what we're doing. And just like what we just went through, for us, we relaunched in 2019 as well. And you know, they need seatbelts. It's kind of frightening. And I don't say that disrespectfully. It's our job to bring them forward, maybe a little bit slower and not overwhelm them with all the cool WYSIWYGs we now have.
Totally agree. Marlise, what about you? You've certainly done a lot in this area too.
I think it's interesting in looking at the type of DMO, because at the state level, we've seen partners really grab onto the research and get much more excited. I've been busier in the last 2 years than in the last 16 years in this position. So I think it may be the partners who are your main partners. So for us at the state level, we work with the local DMOs. So we would work with DMOs like the two of yours, whereas you're probably working with the hotels and the restaurants directly. And so there's kind of the middle group there that we're working with. And I've just seen them so excited about research, so interested in doing more research on their own, so much more interested in partnering with us. We've had a very robust marketing cooperative program for the last, I don't know how, 20, 30 years, very robust. And we've been able to build research co-ops over the last several years that partners are grabbing onto and running with. And I'm so excited about that. So, I think it just depends on which type of partners that you're working with. We've had some really successful conversations, and I think they're taking to it. I mean, of course, there are some that don't understand, but I feel like that our partners have really recognized the importance of research over the pandemic. Based on the number of calls I'm getting and the number of requests I'm getting and the number of presentations I've been asked to do, in state to different groups, I feel like I'm like, finally, you realize the importance of data and analysis. So it's been pretty good.
That's awesome. Vicki, what about you? What's your experience been like with that as you've been kind of shifting to new KPIs?
Yeah, I think people have overwhelmingly embraced it. I mean, folks will have questions, right? Like my favorite question is, well, what if I have a mobile phone number from when I lived in Cleveland, Ohio? Are you counting me as someone from Cleveland, even though I've lived in Roanoke, Virginia for the past 10 years, right? And so, but once you kind of get through the questions, and they're legitimate questions, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I think too, just people like pretty pictures. I hate to say it, but just the super whiz bang, heat maps and all of that. I think people think, hey, that's pretty slick. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. It is. I love Darren Dunn, right? Our one of our co-founders. He talks about. We see this everywhere, but right when you see motion, you see visual motion, it really does connect emotionally. It helps us to connect emotionally. And that goes a long way when we're telling stories and trying to articulate, right, the value of the visitor economy, literally what's happening, whether that is a greater impact with food than maybe we've realized previously, right, or a greater impact in this sector of our destination that we've just we haven't had visibility into it. And so in the past, at least. And so definitely I agree with that. Okay. One question, just as we're running low on time here, I'm curious, this year in 22, right? In 2022, what are you hoping to learn the most about your visitor economy? Is there anything that you want to be focused on or that you're really curious about this year moving into the rest of the year that you want to kind of be able to research or maybe not research, but you just want to learn about the visitor economy? Todd, what about you?
For us, it's really going to be looking at the traditional soft seasons, the soft months, and really trying to drill down on who was the audience there and how do we convert more people like them. Our occupancy or local revenue has gone up in lodging year over year, even through the pandemic. We had a record year in 2021. Taxes were up, revenues were up, occupancy was up, as well as ADR. So it's really, how do we take that history, again, looking back to move forward and say, how do I fix these 3 weeks in August for my partners? How do I fix those 2 weeks in November? How do I work with our marketing team and our partners like you to say, we've got 2 weeks in April that we really want to impact? I think it's really drilling down to targeted moments that are going to have the most impact on the community and our partnerships.
I love that. I love that. That's great. Vicky, what about you? How would you answer that?
So what I would like to do is finally have proof that when you target visitors from further away, they stay longer and they spend more money, right? We launched Boston this year. And so it'll be interesting to see as time evolves, and it'll probably be 23 or 24 down the road. But, we've always said that. That's why international is so important, right? So it will be nice to be able to kind of back that up and have a very pretty chart to show that they stay longer and they spend more money.
You crack me up. I love it. I love it. Marlise, what about you?
Yeah, I want to dig in to more of the local level. So the data that you all are seeing at the local level, look at cross visitation. And, we really have a focus this year on our urban markets. They were hurt so badly during the pandemic. We had destinations in our mountains and along our coast that saw record years in 2020 as people flocked to the outdoors and to more rural areas. But our cities really hurt, and they're still hurting with the lack of meetings and conventions and business travel. So really, I want to look at, what can we do? How does that cross visitation, that movement of visitors from different areas, how can we use that to help our urban partners, who are still struggling?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. We were doing some, my team product side, we were at Zartico just yesterday morning. In fact, we're doing some analysis ourselves of basically what questions are our partners like the three of you asking the most, meaning through your use of the data and the insights, which is it that is really resonating the most? And they align very much with that, Marcus. I mean, they really are aligned with understanding cross visitation, who's going what, where specifically, and then when more really, and what is the influence, right, that you have had on that directly?
I think, Josh, what you did for us with the cannabis traveler was we'll do more of that with other types of travelers, because we were able to determine who the cannabis traveler is, where they're coming from, where do they spend their money, what hotels do they stay at, and track their whole pattern of activity in the market. And we want to be able to take that type of data, do more with companies like yours and specifically Zartico, where we can say, okay, tell me about the people who go to women's retail shops. Tell me about people who go to brew pubs. Tell me about people who go to pizza places or. I think those are the areas that we really want to drill down even tighter on.
Well, I love that. And I so am thankful for the three of you for giving up your time and joining with us and helping obviously the entire community learn and grow together. This is certainly one of the great gifts that eTourism Summit gives to all of us. So thank you, Will and Becca and the whole team, for allowing us to come and participate in this session. And definitely for those of you that are tuning in, please feel free to reach out to me directly anytime. Certainly, I know Vicky, Marlise, and Todd would say they welcome your questions too, right? But if there's anything that Zartico can do to help you gain an even clearer view of your visitor economy in real time, similar to what Marlise, Vicky, and Todd are doing, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to help and partner with you to answer these questions and more. And again, just want to say thank you. and hope all of you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you later.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Very much appreciated. It's we talked a lot over the course of those webinars the last couple of years about all the available data that's now available to us as tourism marketers. But it was really great to have Victoria, Marlise, and Todd share some of these examples of database decision making. So great session. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Zartico, for your continued support. It's very, very much appreciated. Last year, one of the really cool things that we highlighted at the eTourism Summit in Las Vegas was a partnership that we had with Crant to identify the most influential destination marketing leaders and to learn what they were talking about by using machine learning and tracking all of their comments and their interactions and engagements on LinkedIn. Really cool event. Really, again, helped us understand what destination marketing leaders were talking about, what they were sharing, and what was most important to them. And then obviously who was most influential within each of those different realms. And this year we're expanding that program, really excited about the most influential leaders in travel. Certainly encourage you to, if you have somebody in your organization, if there's somebody that's especially inspiring to you that you follow and look to for advice in terms of tourism and destination marketing and the global travel industry, certainly encourage you to go to etourismsummit.com and register and nominate those people you think are the most influential. And then this year at eTourism Summit in June, we'll highlight who those individuals are that are the most influential in the travel industry and tourism, identify what they've been talking about over the course of this last year, what they're most interested in, most passionate in, and really how they're driving and guiding the conversations as it relates to travel and tourism. So please go to etourismsummit.com, log in and nominate those people that you think are the most influential. We're going to run a quick video on that exciting program.
In 2021, through the use of AI, we were able to identify the 10 most active leaders in the DMO community on LinkedIn. In 2022, we'll expand this exercise to encompass travel industry leaders beyond destination marketing. Who deserves a shout out for their industry insights as we all navigate our new reality together? Visit etourismsummit.com to let us know who are the most influential leaders in travel.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing who is the most influential people in travel and tourism, what they've talked about, and what we can learn from them. So it's a great program. And again, nominate yourself, nominate somebody that's active on LinkedIn, and we'll put that through the machines and find out what the most influential leaders in travel are talking about. So now from Lori, I've got another trivia question. This is from the travel vertical. What destination uses the tagline "Greatness around every turn"? Throw your guesses into the chat column there, and we will again, whoever gets it right will have a shot at getting a free registration to eTourism Summit in Orlando. All right, and if you guessed it, the Great Rivers and Routes Tourism Bureau, you're a winner. Very cool. So I'm really excited. I'm going to go straight to the session, going from and one good friend to another, and I'm really excited to welcome Matt Steiker, the Senior VP of Travel at panel of leaders talking about how destination brands reflect community values. Really important conversation in today's environment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Matt.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. This is Matt Steiker, SVP Travel Advisory at BVK. Joining me today for this panel on the eTourism Summit is Stephanie Barco, who is BVK's Head of Strategy, Research, and Insights, Caitlin Eskilsson, who is President and CEO of Visit Salt Lake City, and Christina Ernie, who is Vice President of Marketing at Visit Reno Tahoe. Thanks all three of you for joining me today. I hope this will be an interesting discussion for everyone, and look forward to any questions that anybody has. We have a ton of content, and I think maybe we need or want to make up a little bit of time. So we're going to just jump right in, if that's all right. This was really exciting to us to participate in this because, as marketers, oftentimes our success really relies very heavily on the balance between humanity and science, and recognizing that no one has all of the answers scientifically, and that the humanity side, the art side, is really hard to measure. So we have to live sort of on the knife's edge of those two things constantly. BVK has been building brands that are rooted in those values for a long time. Values-based brands is one of the things that really makes up our brand. And so we're really happy to see this emerge as one of the really key transformational areas for DMOs. Coming out of Destination Next, it was obviously one of the really important fundamental principles of how that whole team sees the evolution of DMOs moving forward. And even in the larger context of the way that consumers are interacting with brands, they're really looking for brands that have and reflect their own values. Stephanie, maybe kick us off a little bit by sort of explaining the values, sort of what they are, and maybe the data science behind how the values are driving decision-making.
Sure. You know, I think any of us in this category, in this space, you know, people who are stewards of brands, we want to make sure we're finding a space that matters to the people we serve, whether it's the residents of our destinations, the travelers that we hope to attract, or just us as people who work on behalf of somewhere, right? We want to connect into something. It wants to mean something to us. You know, and the reason that we do values-based positioning is because of the role that values have in our life. So there's just a ton of research behind how we identify what values are and the impacts that they have on decision making. So values are kind of like our guiding life principles. They form the foundation of who we are, who we want to be. Whether we think about it consciously or not, we choose organizations, brands, people to invite into our life because they get us closer to who we want to be and what matters to us. They reflect and play back our values. So when you think about, you know, where we want to travel, where you want to go on your next trip, it is about the things that you can do in the destination, right? It's got to check off boxes of activities or interests that you have. But even more than that, it's about who you want to be when you're there, how you want to feel when you're there, what it conjures up inside of you when you're there. And a lot of that goes back to our values and just those fundamental principles of who we are. So that is the reason we do values-based branding, to take destinations beyond just the things that we have and elevate it to a place of higher meaning in people's life. So we look for values that connect to audience motivations, that connect to destination DNA, right? And this can come from the residents themselves. It can come from the history of the destination, the culture, the vibe. And we want to find values that connect into cultural trends, that create a broader narrative for the destination to tap into, so that it drives relevance. So values are kind of that underpinning that allow the brand to come to life in a meaningful way to fundamentally drive decision-making towards those destination brands.
That's great, thank you. The interesting thing for me always about the notion of values-based marketing is that each destination may have multiple different values that are associated with it. And it depends sort of on the residents there, how the visitors respond, et cetera, what everyone is seeking. Caitlin, we landed with Visit Salt Lake City with you on this value of inventiveness. And the consumer-facing line, anyway, of west of conventional as a way of really expressing that. I know that you had a very sort of personal, maybe even visceral reaction to the manifesto that we developed and some of the campaign elements. I wonder if you could talk for a minute just about why it was that the work touched you in sort of an emotional way, it seemed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have lived in the Salt Lake area for 20 years, and everyone, we've seen so many people moving in here, and, our tourism has grown, but no one could really figure out why. And I think we were sort of missing that elevator pitch. So when you would ask people what they loved about Salt Lake, it would be this laundry list, and they would just go on and on, almost to the point of just where they were saying, there's something for everyone, which is the most bland statement you could possibly have, right? And so I think when we were able to kind of home in on inventiveness as a key brand pillar, that we were finally able to tell the story of who we are. And it was a very authentic way of getting to that point. It's a great way of us being able to now launch our brand narrative off of that key pillar. And so I think it just, for the first time, I was able to actually articulate what Salt Lake was. And it was just such a special, kind of magical moment for us.
That's really cool. I want to come back to that in a bit and talk about not only how that works and relates to tourism, but then more specifically, the sort of broader industry base, economic base in Salt Lake. Because to me, there's such a fundamental connection. Steph, you talked about brand DNA. There's sort of fundamental connection between the idea of inventiveness and Salt Lake City sort of writ large as a geographical destination. Before we do that, Christina, I wonder if you could talk for a bit about where you guys are with Reno Tahoe. It's this sort of true Renaissance city where at times you can feel like you can see the rapid pace of progress playing out right in front of your eyes with new industry moving in. That brand value of ambition that we landed on with you guys, can you talk for a minute in the same way that Caitlin did about Salt Lake City and inventiveness? Can you talk about why ambition felt so right to you guys in Reno?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as Matt said, our brand value is ambition. And I will say it immediately resonated with everyone on our team, in our board, in our community, which was so key because kind of what Caitlin said, everyone has a different reason why they love their area. And we kind of have similar destinations where it's like, there are tons of opportunities in the area and you can easily go down that laundry list of things that are great. Any of us can with our destinations, but here in Reno Tahoe, we've always been there's a lot of, we call it like achievers, whether you're climbing the highest mountain or the tallest peak, or you want to be fastest down the ski hill, or dreaming up the next big art piece at Burning Man, which we're the gateway to Burning Man, or holding your meetings and conventions in a unique venue. We always try to kind of go big and be ambitious, and we're the biggest little city. Reno is, we're greater than just them, but kind of going along those lines. And Nevada doesn't have many boundaries, and there isn't a lot of red tape. And the people who live here not only embrace that freedom, they thrive on it, I think. And so that's kind of, in BVK, kind of saw that when they were helping establish this brand value. And so when we were going after our new target audience, those were the types of people that we wanted to invite to come to our city. We wanted those types of people who also wanted to embrace those brand values and want those people to feel that when they're here in the area as well. So we want to go after those ambitious, active, career-oriented audiences to come here.
Yeah, that's great. And again, so what's so interesting, that sort of active, career-oriented, it can speak to a visitor, but it can also speak to other segments of the target audience as well.
Right.
Super interesting. You guys in Reno and Caitlin, I think in Salt Lake City as well, there've been some perception challenges that both of you have faced in your destinations. And I mean, no offense by this is just, input and sort of what has been sort of out in culture, that Reno can be perceived as this sort of tired old gambling town, despite the fact that, the reputation of the Rat Pack being there, et cetera, like it also makes it really cool. But there's also this, it's a little bit tired. And in Salt Lake City, the perception of conservatism with the Mormon Church and the associations there, et cetera. Christina, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how the values-based strategy sort of helps you overcome those challenges in Reno specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all hear about all of our destinations, all the perceptions that people have. And, I think that you can't avoid perceptions and pretend like they're not there and just tell a narrative that you want and hope. But you have to really embrace those things. So I'll tell you just something that we have done with the use of neon. So like neon, for example, is something that's often tied to gambling. And you can maybe take an old neon sign and kind of tie it to like that mini Vegas perception, right? So neon is a huge part of our city. It's something that our city has a lot of. And instead of kind of avoiding it, we've kind of recently embraced it a ton. And we went out and found like a millennial neon artist and kind of, so that's it, is bridging that old perception with the new modern version of it. And so how can we take those perceptions, acknowledge them, and just kind of over communicate how they're not an issue? And so with neon, we went up on the millennial neon artist. We tied in the Burning Man art pieces around town and kind of highlighted how cool that is. And with those art pieces, highlighting like the tech integration behind some of those pieces, so we can have that story that we can tell as a part of it. Or the bocce ball courts around town that have some neon elements to it, or the clear kayaks up in Tahoe that are outlined in neon that help give that visibility of the clearest like alpine lake in North America. So taking something that has the potential to be tied to a negative story and tying it into all these really cool positive stories. And so when people see the neon of Reno, their mind doesn't go to that potential, that negative perception that it's like, oh yeah, and we can go and do this and that, and neon is cool. And thankfully neon is having a moment too, like amongst like the Instagram space right now, and those Instagram moments, and have it being vibrant and eye-catching. And so we've just been taking that opportunity to really lean into that and to tell those stories. That's and awesome. Help change perception that way.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I think I've just decided that in my next life, I want to come back as a millennial neon artist. Like, that just sounds really cool. Caitlin.
I should tell her that's her new job title.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I have to lose a few years, I think, as well, in order to fit the millennial. Caitlin, maybe same question for you. How has inventiveness sort of helped you address some of the conservatism perceptions in maybe new and refreshing ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of like Christina, we had to throw out this whole idea that we were going to be apologetic, because we were apologetic for, years and years. And I think it just wasn't serving us. I don't think it serves any destination. And so what we would historically try to do is, for example, we would, if someone thought we couldn't drink there, then we would say, oh, we're so sorry. And we would cover it up with all this narrative about that you could drink here. Well, really, after we did some focus groups, actually with Connect, we found out that people expect that they can come to a major city and get a drink, and actually we were over communicating that whole you can't get a drink here perception. So I think for us, we've kind of stepped back and we've embraced who we are, which is this really cool emergence of not only the Mormon pioneers, but also the railroad industry and the mining industry. And we've really taken this content first approach. We have a series called the Salt of the Earth series, and it's all about the makers that are found here, in and around Salt Lake, and the beautiful storytelling. And a lot of times it's very ancillary to the tourism story, but really it serves up as kind of that culture piece and kind of the broader inventiveness perspective. And it's not always attached to a direct call to action. It's really more of that narrative and that content for storytelling.
That's really cool. The idea of Salt of the Earth, just really grounding you in that place where you live, connecting back to the brand, and also providing this really nice springboard for inventiveness. That's great. Yeah. I love that.
And I think the thing about values is, we're purposeful around what we choose so that it overcomes issues or challenges that the brand's having, right? So purposefully choosing ambition for Reno Tahoe, which is very inherent in a very maverick and Renaissance city that's pushing limits and pushing for progress. Because if people don't think that the value can be a way, like a vehicle for us to drive that message forward in a way that feels very authentic and true to the destination, or, on the other side with Salt Lake, you've got businesses moving into Salt Lake that are tech and innovation hubs that are pushing progress. You've got an amazing and eclectic and diverse community coming in, and it thrives on open-minded thinking and new ideas come. And so inventiveness is about, taking so many of the things right? It's so true to the destination and giving it a vehicle to talk about everything else going on in a way that's relevant, but also pushes against those stereotypes for long-term growth. And I think, that's kind of one of the amazing things about a value is it gives you those legs to both connect in a true way with the people who are within the destination, but also creates that relevance and a new narrative outside of the destination as well.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It was pretty sure it was John Cougar who sang, "You can stand for something or you'll fall for anything." That whole idea is such an important one in destination marketing because it's really easy, as both Christina and Caitlin, you guys pointed out, it's really easy to want to try to be everything to everybody. But the idea of really rooting yourself in a singular value means that everything gets to emanate from that source, and you get to really stand apart for who you are and what you stand for, as opposed to just being viewed as they just have everything like every other destination does. The sort of next question area, Steph, you provided a really nice bridge there. This growing number of destination leaders, especially some of the younger generations, are really focused on a very holistic industry approach to optimize the interactions between visitors, the industry that serves them, as well as then the communities and the residents that host them. Basically the town, the place, the destination in which they live, in which they've landed. How do you see values playing a role in connecting these audiences and allowing the folks who both live and work and rely on the industry to connect with and engage in a positive way with those folks who maybe don't, whose livelihood maybe doesn't rely on tourism as directly? How do values play a role? Caitlin, maybe you can start us off there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this kind of plays to that whole, are we a destination marketing organization or destination management? And I think we probably are somewhere in the middle. I think that the content that we try to place and put out is content that I think can be used by locals as well as visitors. We always get the question, well, where do the locals go? What's unique to the destination? How do they want that really authentic experience? And so I think a lot of that just organically kind of puts us into wanting to create this really organic content that feels authentic to across all areas. But I also think that in terms of the actual values that people are wanting when they're here, and we have to make sure that we balance that with what the locals want as well. So a lot of our content is dispersing traffic so that we're not just pushing travelers up one canyon and so we have to be really careful about the sustainability principles and making sure that we're really cognizant of making sure that we're maintaining that quality of life for the locals, but that we're also touching on what the visitor would want to experience. But I think overall, it's just about really authentic storytelling, diversifying, and so that you're making sure you're touching people at their core value to things that they would love to do and market. And I think that will translate over to the locals as well. So It's just that constant balance. But I think, in terms of really protecting the community from the sustainability side and making sure that locals don't feel like they're getting that over tourism, it's sort of our responsibility to tell those stories across all walks, and so that we're not pushing people into, again, that one singular experience.
Yeah. Christina, I saw you nodding your head a lot at that. It sounds like that resonates with you as well. Has ambition as a value played a role in your ability to demonstrate to your residents how important they are in sort of the tourism economy? How do they view that value?
Yeah, absolutely. Just going off of that whole sustainability comment too, I think it's super important that the community embraces the type of audience that you are attracting to the area. And so going off of that we're trying to attract that mindful traveler to our great outdoors, one who respects the outdoors, who isn't going to trash the outdoors. And I think it's important to communicate to your community that that's the type of people you have to bring in. And I think they'll much more reach out and value that we can, and going off of that whole ambition thing, we feel like it's possible to do it. It's possible to have that traveler come in, over tourism was an issue throughout the outdoors, but it's not a lofty goal to have success and have these people enjoy the outdoors and also be good stewards of the area, to not leave their trash on the trail, to pack it in and out. And as a community, we can all help communicate that message so it gets respected. I think ambition's not just towards a career goal, it's also community goals and just things that you can achieve together. And I think that that's something that the community can kind of embrace and build upon. And so, I think it's super important that the community, especially in cities where tourism, like in our area, is one of the biggest economic drivers, that they all know that they have a role in this and that their experience and what they communicate to the customer has an impact both ways, and that they need to be nice to them to have them come back to the people that they want to keep coming back. So I think we're always out there. And thankfully, we have a great community who acknowledges that and respects that.
That's terrific. And acknowledge the work that you've done in order to build that. Caitlin, did you have something to add there?
I mean, I just wanted to add too that because we create so much content within our offices, we've seen a lot more of other agencies repurposing our content, using it, which we love because it spreads the brand. But our economic development agencies and our chambers, and they're all reaching out to us constantly, which is our goal. We would love to have one community playbook, if you will. But it's been really cool to see that, because they're embracing the new brand, but they're also embracing the storytelling. So we'll put out a piece about a really cool, thriving small business, which is a core brand to inventiveness, or a core piece to inventiveness. And they'll pick that up and tell that story in almost a whole different way. Wow. So it's really cool that it's getting repurposed for different functions.
Yeah, that's great. Steph, you've been working on values-based marketing longer really than, sort of the movement to shift from destination marketing into destination management has really taken root. So it seems like there's this really nice parallel path that you've helped create for values-based marketing being part of that shift. Can you talk a little bit about that, picking up on what Caitlin and Christina just said?
Yeah, it's been fun for us to see it on the journey, because we've been doing values-based brand building for almost 15 years. And it's always been reflective of a community's brand and community's values, and really bringing that forward. And I think what has been exciting to see is, to Caitlin's point, how when you do it right and when you find a way to reflect a destination through the lens of values, people notice and they want to be part of it. And they want to take that content that reflects what matters to them and even use it beyond what it was intended to do. And I think as destinations move from being marketing organizations to management organizations, values are the bridge. Values are the way that we build those connections. Caitlin, we're working on the strategic plan, right, for Salt Lake, and using inventiveness as the way that we can start to foster better resident sentiment around what we love about the destination, and using that as a way to think about how do residents become a great vehicle for travelers to feel welcome here too. And so I think it just can really become that nucleus between why I choose to live here and what I love about it and the values that come to life for me as a resident, versus the travelers who increasingly want to feel like locals anyways, right? They want to channel what that experience is, and the value allows them, to do that. And I think from even just a creative perspective, when that comes to life, the value gives us just a human element to bring in. It becomes less about, right, the things which we've been saying, the things that we do in the destination, and more about that mindset, that state of being, that vibe that is created, which gives us just a lot of space to play creatively and think about how to show a destination in a really fresh and relevant and meaningful way. And that can kind of transcend and stay with the destination for a really long time and still always be new, because that value means so many different things to people.
Yeah, I love that the values are the bridge is the sort of key part of that was so interesting to me, that gets an organization like a DMO from a place where it is again, generally speaking, most of them still live in this world of this transition between a convention and visitors bureau and the destination marketing organization. And now they're being asked or expected to jump leap years ahead, light years ahead even, and become something fundamentally different. And that notion that values are the bridge is a really interesting one. To me, the depth of it is what's so interesting, that it goes well beyond just simply, let's do an ad campaign, that we're actually rooting in something that's much more substantive versus more superficial. It's one of the things that I always really responded to about the idea of values-based marketing, because we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of, every destination has a litany of things to say about itself. And oftentimes, destinations are viewed as sort of a sea of sameness. As you put advertising up on a wall, it really does often look the same. Steph, let me come back to you for just a second, and then I want to hear Caitlin and Christina's thoughts. But just the thought of, how does values-based marketing really help a DMO and a destination sort of stand out in that sea of sameness?
Well, I think it gives us permission to go even beyond the destination. As Christina has said, we're tapping into a specific type of an audience that reflects those values. And so we want to speak to them about what those values are and what it means to them. So that might lead us to show different things about a destination. It might show brand partnerships that elevate or change the story about a destination. I think the different way that we go about it is, when we're kind of briefing and thinking about creative, we're really honing in on that value and the humanness of that value, and how the destination brings it to life versus just what does the destination have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fundamental difference in values-based positioning. I think a traditional positioning is to say, I have this destination, I have a brand, here's what I have, I hope you like it. The way that we do it is, here's what matters to people, here's how I plug that brand or that destination into it. So just the posture of it becomes a little bit different. And that gives us creative legs to move outside of just featuring the traditional things in the category, because we're approaching it differently. And I think it's led us to be able to do some really fun and interesting things, for destinations over the course of this experience that we've been doing this.
Yeah, Christina, Caitlin, maybe Caitlin, it looked like maybe you had a thought on that to continue that.
Well, I think that, in a lot of ways, it also helps you kind of home in on, when you have that core value, it kind of lets you just home in so specifically on bringing it all back to that, right? So when you're ideating and you're brainstorming, I think at the end of the day, you can go, okay, but how is this reflective of, in our case, inventiveness? And we're constantly bringing it back to that. And I think that it actually, in a lot of ways, it simplifies things as well. When you're trying to think big, you're just making sure that you're always kind of on that track. I think for us as well, the challenge to my team was, okay, inventiveness, and same with, ambition, it's a really lofty goal. And so I feel like it's also sort of that, challenge of, okay, how do you make this inventive, everything that we do? So how do we approach trade shows differently? How do we approach, digital buys differently? And so to be inventive all the time is also a big lofty goal. So I think that in a lot of ways, it simplifies things in some regards, and then it challenges in others. And it's just been really fun to embrace that. So
that's really nice. I love that idea that it becomes both grounding and aspirational.
Yeah.
That it really isn't one or another. You're not living in this world where you're just simply surviving on what has always been, but you're always looking to, how do we do it better? How do we do it differently? How do we do it aligned with that value? Christina, have you found the same thing in Reno?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these values really set up the groundwork for establishing a community and just what you stand for. And I think it really, when Caitlin was talking about like setting up buys, it's like, okay, is this advertising company, do they have the same values do they reflect ambition? And it makes it, when the sky's the limit for where you can advertise, it really helps identify where you should put your time and investment and money into. And a same along the lines of social causes. Over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of social causes, and who do you align with? Where do you step in? Where do you step out? Do you advertise with them in this moment? Do you not, because they're going in this direction? And I think it really sets up that foundation of, instead of being everything to everyone and wanting to be everywhere, it's like, no, these are my values as an organization. We need to stand true to them because we need to keep that trust with our audience. And that's going to only have our community of visitors kind of grow stronger. And yeah, choosing what companies, and I think aligning with, nonprofits and causes is something that's been something that a lot of organizations have really needed to step up and align with over the past few years, even more so, because I think that the audiences, whether it's a traveler or a buyer, wants to know that they have those like-minded cares and values. So
So let me pick up on that. Let me stay with that just line of questioning, Christine, for just a second. Do you have examples that you can call out? And sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious as you're talking about that. Do you have examples of like situations in which organizationally you've made decisions rooted in the value of ambition, that you are going to do this versus that? So for example, at BVK, we've sort of landed on the idea of ingenuity as being a core brand value to the organization. And so when we interview, we're screening people against ingenuity, against curiosity and wonder and knowledge. And so I'm just sort of curious, how have you applied ambition at the organizational level as opposed to at the external marketing level?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the middle of our strategic plan as well. And as we're reassessing values for our organization, working with Destination Next, as you kind of mentioned earlier, is like, what are the values of the organization that you want? And ambition was the top one that our organization, that the employees voted for.
Wow.
And it wasn't planted by the marketing team or anything like that. But it was really neat to see that even the finance teams and the sales teams and everyone, that was their number one value that they wanted to see at our organization, which was really cool. And I think it goes on to some of just the things that we do, whether it's leaf cleanups and park cleanups we sponsor, that we try to go out and our whole team tries to get involved in the community, or participating in some of, like, we're known as a special event destination. And as part of kind of our sponsorships, we'll get the opportunity for our team to go and sign up and compete. And, we're super competitive. We want to beat the other sponsors at here locally. And so our team will get really into it and make the t-shirts and really go and fight for that win and to fight for that achievement. And so it's really neat to see that that is reflected within each individual and as a company as a whole as well.
That's really cool. I know that you're downplaying the credit that marketing gets for that, but it really does sound like that has been something that may have emanated from you guys that has taken root within the larger organization. So that's awesome, and credit to you and your team for doing that. Not to Charles, but to you for sure. Caitlin, what about you? Where or how has inventiveness played a role at the organizational level at Visit Salt Lake?
Yeah, I mean, so pretty early on, kind of simultaneous to going through the brand launch, we actually put our whole team through a Strength Finders assessment. And I think it was really interesting because I believe that everyone is innately inventive. It's just in their own way. And so there are people that might be more outspoken or, less outspoken, or they might ideate a different way. So what we've been really trying to do is every time we have a new program that we're approaching or a new campaign, we encourage kind of ideation across the company, but depending on what your strengths are and kind of what your personality is, it might look a little bit different. So some people might choose to, raise their hand in front of the larger group and say, hey, I have this idea, or some people might just want to submit it anonymously. But what we've really tried to do, especially during COVID, and realizing that, everything was sort of thrown out the window, we've just been trying to garner as many ideas as we possibly can to be inventive and just throwing them all at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it's sort of that we've created a real, I think, judgment-free zone where it's like, no idea is a bad one, and no idea is off the table. And so I think by way of that and creating that culture, we've been able to not only embrace inventiveness, but also create that trust that is really, really inherent to a solid foundation. So
that's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. Steph, I think maybe just in our last minute, if there's anything more that maybe we missed or that we didn't touch on that is important, just around the idea of, kind of a first step even that DMOs can take towards value-based marketing.
Yeah, I think the good news is a lot of organizations are already thinking about values, at least organizationally, right? A lot of companies have that as part of like mission, vision, values. You kind of know what guides us as an organization. And I think the first step is just, again, shifting that lens into not only who we are as an organization or destination, but who the people outside of that we seek, what their values are and how might those be found in the destination uniquely. I think there's a lot of tools that we use at BVK to bring the science part of value, because values are art and science, right? But there's a lot of scientific tools we learn to have that rigorous assessment of values, whether it's audience profile and persona tools that give us the values that live within the destination or within the travelers. Or, we have a PhD of psychology on staff who keeps us honest about the academic research behind the values. So I think just having that lens of values, not just from a, why do I love this destination myself, but why would that outsider crave this destination because of those values, is honestly an easy first step to think about how a value might start to transform the way you think about the destination.
Got it. That's great. Well, we are at time. Caitlin, Christina, Stephanie, thank you guys very much for this. This was awesome. Any of the folks watching, feel free, obviously, to reach out to us, connect on LinkedIn. We're happy to answer any follow-up questions. But thanks to eTourism, to Will, to Becca, to the whole team at Connect. Appreciate it, and we'll hope to talk to you guys soon.
Stephanie, Caitlin, and Christina, we certainly appreciate what a great conversation. I love the idea about community-based values and how that can be the bridge from the old days of tourism marketing, what was art, culture, shopping, dining, and fun for the whole family, to real deep community value-based decision making. And really interesting to hear how these organizations are taking that to the core of their own operations as well. So awesome conversation. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, BVK, for bringing that great session to the eTourism Summit community. Very, very much appreciated. One program I wanted to hit on before we go to our next session is the eTourism Summit Emerging Tourism Stars program. Was launched last year. We had 8 amazing candidates out of like over 50 applications that ended up getting a scholarship to eTourism Summit and doing some really cool mentoring programs and a lot of great opportunities. And what I'd really like to ask all of you in the audience to really identify those people that have, in the last couple of years, have really gone above and beyond. This isn't an age-driven thing. It's not a title-driven thing. It's people that have really gone deep into the communities, doing great work back at the office, but also diving deep into your communities and really making a difference there, as well as your day-to-day job. And that's really what we're trying to identify. Obviously, talent in the tourism industry, as we look at the travel vertical every week and see how many people are switching jobs or how many jobs are available. Really encouraging the emerging tourism stars is almost an industry-wide initiative that we have all got to embrace. I'd just like to ask you to please take a look around your offices, around your communities, and identify those people that are really making a difference and then nominate them for the emerging tourism stars. We've got a really quick video on that program.
What, in your mind, is an emerging tourism star to you?
To me, an emerging tourism star is someone that wants to go above and beyond their role when the time is needed. This is someone who would step up to benefit their organization, take the opportunities that are given, whether that's providing input or voice on projects or taking on a whole new role. This person brings new ideas to the table, is passionate about the tourism industry. And all of that, I believe, would show through the work that they're doing.
The flexibility is a major component there. To be an individual that, is flexible and able to bend with the current trends and to bend and to mold with plans and destination management, and all of those things combined are incredibly important.
I think an emerging tourism star is someone who strives to do better for their destination each and every day. It isn't necessarily a person who seeks out recognition for all their successes. You know, they put their destination first and do what's necessary to help their community.
You know, I think being an emerging tourism star is someone that, of course, I'm honored to be, but I'm most grateful that an emerging tourism star is someone in the industry that recognizes that, you know, they actually have a platform to be recognized, and they have that ability to take their thoughts and their different paths of life to be able to talk to the rest of the industry so that we can come up with these bold, innovative, and new ideas to bring to the table.
All right, that's again an excellent program. Certainly encourage you all to put a nomination in. We've got until first, so just another week or so, and I can tell you just some insight from the people that the team that was judging that last year. Really, the nomination itself is really important to elevate and separate. It was pretty easy to cut from 50 to 30. It was really hard to cut from 30 to 7. So please put the time into it, and we'll definitely get the emerging tourism stars recognized and get them scholarship to eTourism Summit and introduced to the community. All right, my next trivia question from Lori at the Travel Vertical. What destination saw a surge in applications when it launched a remote worker incentive program worth $12,000 plus a year of paid outdoor recreation? Put it in the chat. Correct answers will be included in a drawing for a free registration to eTourism Summit in June. All right. The answer to this one, West Virginia, put together a really amazing program that was highlighted in the Travel Vertical. One of the things is I've hit on a couple times that has been a huge resource for the industry is all those job listings and job changes. If you know of a job listing, if you have a job opening in your organization or know somebody got some new hires, please do me a favor and email Lori at thetravelvertical.com, and we'll make sure that we get that information posted in the jobs update and the jobs roundup. So thank you very much. I am now ready for our next case study. Exciting conversation on how to build consumer confidence using online reviews. I want to thank Rove for their amazing partnership, and I'm going to turn it over to James and Courtney with Banff Lake Louise Tourism. So thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Will. That was a great introduction. And hello, everyone. We're excited to talk to you about rating and review data today. This is a data source that's been widely used by our clients in Europe and in Asia. And as North America is opening up, we're seeing a lot of interest from our clients in America and in Canada. And so we thought we'd take this time to share it with you and talk about some of the insights that you can get from the data source and do that with our client, Banff Lake Louise Tourism. So we are in great company today. We've got Courtney Babbitt, Director of Marketing at Banff Lake Louise Tourism, and our Senior Strategic Planner, Lori Dillon-Schock, who will take us through a use case of how this data is being used within Banff. Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to give you a bit of an introduction into Rove. We are a data and analytics company focused in tourism. We help DMOs become more data-driven with a suite of data products and services. We also have our Destination Insights platform that helps DMOs better manage their data with a complete and easy-to-use business intelligence solution, helping you combine all your data from your tourism destination into actionable insights that help you make better business decisions. All right, so let's get on with the show. Courtney, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to share with the audience some of the challenges that your destination kind of has faced through the pandemic, how that relates to the data set. And then we'll pass it off to Lori. Lori, you're going to take us through the actual data and explain kind of the details of it. And then collectively, we'll kind of go through a use case and share some insights and see what you can really get out of the data set. All right, so Courtney, why don't you take it off?
Sounds good. Thanks, James. So one of the challenges that we've really faced, Banff Lake Louise has really historically drawn an international market to our iconic Canadian location nestled here in the Canadian Rockies. And we've really focused our efforts on delivering amazing experiences to all travelers. However, international travelers really provide incredibly high net promoter scores for our destination. And with the pandemic, that really changed with the border closures. We saw a shift more to a domestic and local traveler who doesn't view Banff Lake Louise the same as that bucket list destination. And so as the pandemic endured, we really needed to stretch our marketing budget and also become a bit more surgical with our marketing strategies and tactics to ensure that we were driving consumer confidence in the destination and ensuring we're delivering for that value for money for all travelers, domestic or not. So we really needed to understand the consumer confidence and where it was today. And not just around just safety as of COVID, but also understand what variables were contributing to our ability to deliver a great customer experience for that domestic and local audience. And that's really when we turned to Rove, and they suggested the rating and review data to uncover some of those insights to help us better address those perceptions of safety within the destination and uncover what opportunities we had to meet the expectations of the changing traveler.
Awesome. Thanks, Courtney.
Awesome. Well, let me set the stage for you. Our data set includes some of the most well-known travel review sites, dedicated reviews, global reviews across 14 languages. Sites like Google, TripAdvisor, Priceline, Travelocity, a lot of big names. And for Banff Lake Louise, that is a data set of close to 500,000 ratings and reviews over the last 3 years. We can break it down to over 300 different properties, and that's roughly 63% accommodations, attractions, 12% restaurants. And we can slice and dice this data according to the sector, the source, where the travel rating and review came from, the traveler type, whether they're couples or families or single travelers, the rating and sentiment, individual business, and of course, the time period. Let's take a look for Banff Lake Louise. So first peek into the overall ratings, there's a number of things you're going to notice. In terms of the volume of ratings and reviews, just down slightly, 19%. You can't tell, but this is a similar time period that we're looking at. And being down only 19%, this data set includes some very strong lockdown periods. So I feel that this is an indication of how strong the traveler behavior is around offering a rating and review. The other thing you'll notice with this data set is that Banff Lake Louise has actually done quite well despite the pandemic. It looks like small variances in ratings and sentiment. Well, I'll show you how what makes up this rating has changed. But overall, yes, Banff Lake Louise has some of the most positive ratings that we've seen across this tool. Very, very strong. Now, to help with this data set, we've added a number of scores. So other than average rating and the average sentiment of a review, there's something called the Consumer Confidence Index. This is an overall score that we have weighted to value some data sources over others. So it depends on the data review site that you've used, the recency of comments, the quality of a review, a number of different factors so that you can have a single number that you can rely on and monitor over time. There's two other scores worth mentioning. Sanitary safety score, which talks about the very important sanitation procedure during a pandemic, as well as pandemic precaution score, which are things like masks and social distancing. Importantly, those scores are neutral, like 5 is neutral. It means that you get as many positive mentions as negative mentions. They don't tend to be scores that go up into the 10s because people don't rate them that way. We take our clients through all the scores and how to look at the scores.
That's great, Lori. Yeah, no, thanks, Lori. Let's get into the use case now. That's great.
Yeah. So our first blush look is where do the ratings and reviews come from? And you're going to see some shifts since the pandemic began. Google, Expedia, TripAdvisor, of course, they're very big sources of review, but in the pandemic, Google soared to 42% of the reviews. What does that mean? Well, Google's important, but it's also a reflection of the audience making the review. We have a more local audience, a more domestic audience that doesn't necessarily need to go to a TripAdvisor, but is a heavily user of Google. In fact, Courtney, I believe, some of the media targeting and marketing plans have changed based on this data.
Definitely has. We put more emphasis on Google with our borders being closed still.
Exactly. Awesome. The other thing that we've seen is the traveler type actually remained unchanged during the pandemic. So families, couples, large groups, they are heavy contributors of this review data. And even though we've gone through a pandemic, that source hasn't changed. We're very pleased to find this data because one thing when you look at other data is that party size has changed over time. The number of passengers per booking, that type of thing has varied. Well, this is a very safe and good data source for large groups. So let's take a look at some scores by traveler type. What we notice on the left, pre-pandemic, very high scores. And then since the pandemic has began, we've noticed that families are harder to please. They have, more to consider due to a pandemic. And so the scores have varied quite a bit. And we can work with these scores and help destinations to understand those shifts.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting insight, especially as we move to the next slide and talk about ratings by sector. And of course, when you've got a very demanding visitor in a family, right, type of visitor, they tend to frequent different attractions and look for different experiences. So sorry, Laurie, keep going.
That's great. So the one thing we can do is we can break down all these ratings and reviews to a sector level. When we looked at overall ratings, it didn't feel like the rating had changed quite a lot. But what you see here is that accommodations, their scores have been muting the overall score, whereas food and beverage and attractions have actually gone up during the pandemic. Perhaps Courtney, you can pipe in on what you've seen on your end.
Yeah, definitely as a destination, as Lori mentioned, accommodation is really untouched or unchanged there. But as a destination, we knew that we have a really great offering that's outdoors. And that was something that we're seeing from consumer confidence and sentiment, really looking to doing things outside in wide open spaces. And so we really leaned into that insight and that core strength of ours, also by offering more abilities for our restaurateurs and food and beverage to have more outdoor options for the travelers and visitors.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight.
Yes. Well, the other thing is people are so happy to be dining, right? That is reflected in the score. And we can find that when we drill down. The other drill down worth mentioning is understanding what makes up the score. So it all rolls up to a big number, but ratings is actually broken down into a number of different attributes, from service to cleanliness to facilities to location. When we look at Banff Lake Louise, let's just break down location. They have 10 out of 10 for their views. And certainly if you've ever been to Banff Lake Louise, incredible views. But with a local audience, mostly drive market, transport, that's where, you'll see harder markers for that level of attribute. And we can do this for food and beverage, and we can also break down the scores for pandemic precaution and COVID as well.
Excellent.
Yes, there is amazing value in looking at aggregated data, but we can also get down to an individual business level. What you see here are rows and rows of data against individual businesses that we've masked. You can see the actual opinions that are making up these scores and the breakdown across different attributes. This helps us drill down to the strengths and weaknesses per individual business and help identify where they can adjust their score to improve that value for money.
Yeah, you know what I like about this slide a lot is it reveals some really interesting issues around value for money. But look how strong you are with cleanliness. And Courtney, maybe you can say a few words about that.
Yeah, so definitely value for money is a new challenge for us with that domestic market, and really finding ways that we can really change that ratio for them, both at the business level, but also the destination level. So finding ways where we can have great events and it feels like the destination has lots going on often, to really help change that equation for our more drive market.
Awesome. So let's talk about what's next. Right? We've been using this data set now for about a year, and we know that we've got a lot more use out of it. Courtney, why don't you talk to us about your plans moving forward?
Yeah, so how we plan on using this and how we've already been using it and how to leverage it even more is that the rating and review data has really allowed us to focus and shape our content for workshops and training sessions that we deliver to our tourism businesses in Banff and Lake Louise. So what that means is that we're really helping businesses adapt their product and improve their visitor experience for this new domestic and local audience, but also as it's going to change here in the future. We're also going to continue using the insights to adjust our marketing channel investment. So making sure we're putting our dollars where the reviews are and where we have the most influence. We'll be adapting our marketing messages and content to address specific opportunities that we see in the data that really are impacting that overall experience score. Like that value for money that the team has shared, how more can we help those price sensitive domestic travelers really shape that cost equation for them year round? What can we be doing as a destination to feel more wholesome and give them more reasons to come back? But also the data set is really approachable, and I really want to underscore that it is really a key ingredient for us as a business to ground ourselves in consumer insights and really understand what the sentiment and confidence is so that we're making really strategic and solid decisions as we move forward. But also knowing that in the Canadian border restrictions are lifting, which we're very excited about, but we know that that's also going to shuffle the decks more as more international travelers come back. And what are they worried about, and how can we ensure that we're continuing to meet their needs? So that's how we're going to be using it. And so we're really excited to welcome people back to the mountains here at Banff and Lake Louise as well.
Yes, the mountains are waiting, as we say, right? Yeah. Okay, well, that brings us to our conclusion. We want to thank you very much for your time, and we want to keep the conference on schedule. So if this is of interest to you, please feel free to reach out to myself or Lori to learn more about the data set. We'd love to keep the conversation going and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James, Lori, and Courtney. Really appreciate the great insight and that case study. Awesome way to we kind of wrap up our day today. Couple of quick little points that I wanted to bring up. We have one final trivia question, so make sure that you enter your answer for a chance to win a free registration to eTourism Summit. The question this time: what national park turns 150 years old in 2022? And a bonus on this park is how many times bigger than the 5 boroughs of New York City? Go ahead and type your responses, and Lori will let us know who's got it right.
I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Awesome. So the answer to this one is Yellowstone, which is 10 times larger than NYC. Pretty amazing, and a destination that's been in the news a lot with the television show. Listen, I want to thank you all for spending time with us. We've got one more session, which is going to be a really exciting session with Bound. Looking forward to that. In the meantime, I just wanted to remind everybody to register for the Travel Vertical podcast. Please put your calendars in for June 6th through 8th for eTourism Summit 2022 in Orlando. And we're going to play a quick testimonial video for you on eTourism Summit and why you need to be there.
So far, the conference has been really great. It's exciting to hear a lot of ideas that other state entities are doing, and it's also really exciting to hear that we're also doing a lot of those things. So it's fun to connect with people and talk about the different ways in which we're doing things, and then also just connecting on what else there is to do, especially from a state perspective. So it's been a great conference, and I'm excited for tomorrow.
This conference honestly has been so informational so far. A lot of the speakers have just, really helped guide and give kind of new ideas. So it's been really great.
eTourism Summit so far has been tremendous. We were in a couple of sessions this morning, and they give you a terrific perspective on strategies and ideas. Right out of the gate, we're very excited, meeting a lot of different new and different people, and really looking forward to the next 48 hours.
This is actually my first time attending the eTourism Summit. It's been a great program for us over the course of the last several years. We always are excited to both present and get to interact with our industry peers and talk about what's new in the digital space for destinations. With so much as it's changed this year, there's been some new perspectives on things like remote work and how we can best help support the businesses in our community get through sort of the new world that we are operating in today.
Zeke Coleman here, Senior Director of Product Marketing for Adara, formerly with Visit Savannah for over a decade as the Director of Data Intelligence. And I got to tell you, my favorite conference is the eTourism Summit. I've been coming since I was the Internet Marketing Manager. And as you can tell, with those title changes, it's helped my career. I've learned a ton. I've copycatted on everything that everyone else has said. And that's why I think you should go. I mean, realistically, it's going to add value to your own career, your resume, and hopefully give you some ideas that'll add to your bottom line. So definitely come next year.
All right. So please pencil in June 6th through 8th for the eTourism Summit in Orlando, Florida. Looking forward to a really jam-packed event full of all the enthusiasm, the excitement, the energy, as well as the insights and the community sharing, really the industry coming together to help us all in this time. There's probably never been a time in our industry it's been more important to reconnect, to reimagine, to reinvent destination marketing. And hopefully many of these sessions today have inspired you to do that. I would like to remind you that all of the content is going to be available on ETS 365. You can download the app and view that on your phones, or certainly go to the ETS 365 page online through etourismsummit.com. Really excited about this next session. It's actually a workshop, so it's a different format than we've had with Bound, and it's using Google Analytics to build a personalization strategy. Really important topic that has been reiterated over and over the last year or so about how can we do a better job with personalization. This is actually a workshop. So I ask you to go to the navigation on the left, click the agenda, and then you'll enter into that workshop session. You'll have the ability to ask questions, interact, come on stage, and everything else. So it's a great session. Is starting in 3 minutes. So please join us with Bound for the interactive workshop on using Google Analytics to build a personalization strategy. I'd like to thank you all for spending your afternoon with us and hope to see you in Orlando.
We're heading for sunny Orlando for eTourism Summit 2022, June 6th through the 8th. Co-located with IPW, we'll see you at the Orange County Convention Center. Register now at etourismsummit.com.